Hey Booktube, my name is Juan. I'm just one reader, and today I'm doing the hype book tag. I saw this book tag over at Kristen's channel, over at Kristen Books, I think it is, and I think this is a really fun challenge. It consists of 5 different questions, all related to the topic of book hype. And for each question, you have to talk about 5 different books. So let's get started. The first question is basically which book have you seen on Booktube that is really hyped, but that in your opinion actually deserves such hype? And I chose 5 of these. The first one is Gillian Flynn. So this goes for Gillian Flynn's novels in general, all 3 of them, as well as her short story, The Grown Up. This is my particular favorite one. It's called Dark Places. It's fabulous. It's fantastic. It's a very well-rounded novel, and it's a fantastic, creepy, twisted thriller. Absolutely adored it. Next one is the very hyped book, The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. This is one of my favorite series, and I've read it multiple times. The first one is, in my opinion, much better than the second one, but the second one is also fantastic. It's just the first one is kind of one of those like perfect books. It's very hard not to love this book, not to fall in love with it. I have yet to meet a person that doesn't love this book completely, like love it to pieces. And by the way, this is a great book to recommend to someone that doesn't typically read. I found that this book is just it's foolproof. It always works. Next, I chose one of my favorite books of all time, and that is The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. This is a book that has been very hyped. It won the Pulitzer Prize, and not considering that, I thought this book was just flawless. I thought it was spectacularly beautifully written. I thought the characters were so lifelike and so important. The story was so compelling and so private. It felt like, I mentioned this in one of my videos from like 1 or 2 years ago, I felt like I was hand in hand with Theo, the protagonist, from the first page till the last one. It was just a wonderful experience, and I really look forward to giving it a reread. Then I actually chose a YA novel. I don't typically read YA because it tends to disappoint me more often than not, but also very romantic YA books I tend to avoid completely, but this one I gave it a chance and I loved it. It was Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. This was also very hyped on Booktube. Maybe not so much right now, but it certainly was like a year or 2 ago, and it wasn't until quite recently that I picked it up, and I loved it to pieces. I thought the characters were very compelling and very lifelike, and I just wanted to keep reading and reading and reading, and I was quite sorry and sad when it ended. And the last book that I have for this category is A Little Life by Hannah Yanagihara, probably one of the most hyped book from last year. It was actually my favorite book of 2015. You can go and check that video in which I mentioned my favorite books of 2015. Yeah, I just loved this book. It was incredibly hyped. Many people really loved it, just as I did. Some people really hated it, and they are right to hate it because I don't think this book is perfect by any means. Actually, I made a separate video that I thought was really interesting, in which I mentioned why A Little Life was so controversial in terms of why did some people love it to pieces like I did, and some people hated it, like really despised it, could not even talk about it without throwing things at the walls. I think this book causes a lot of reactions on people, and it just depends on personality, but I personally thought it really deserved the hype. The second question is, which books have received a lot of hype on Booktube, but you think they don't deserve that hype? So books that have thoroughly disappointed me, that are very, very, very hyped on Booktube. I chose 5. The first one being We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. I don't even own this book anymore. I got rid of it because I just did not like that book at all. I thought it was very predictable. I thought it was very pretentious. I didn't like the writing. I thought the writing was trying too hard to be a very beautiful prose, and suddenly through it had this element, the plot twist at the end just thrown in, that didn't really make any sense in that particular tone. I just didn't like that book. I thought it was a mess, really, and it's one of the most, or it was one of the most hyped books on Booktube. The second one is The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey. I read this a couple of weeks ago, didn't enjoy it at all. I gave it like 1 star. I had to push myself to finish it. I think they're turning this into a movie, and I do look forward to watching it because I think it would look very cool on screen, but the book was just very, very bad, in my opinion. My very humble opinion. Then I'm going to mention Paper Towns by John Green. Don't get me wrong, I don't have anything against John Green. In fact, I really love him. I thought The Fault in Our Stars came to me in a particular point in my life that I just appreciated it so much, and I really treasured it, even with its flaws. I really adored it. Looking for Alaska was another one that I absolutely adored. An Abundance of Catherines, it's a mediocre book. It's a very simple book, very plain, but I love the characters. Will Grayson, absolutely loved that book to pieces. But this one is just... I was physically angry at this book for how meh it was. I hated the characters. I hated the protagonist, Quentin. I hated the girl, Margot. I hated everything about this book. I don't think it deserves any hype whatsoever. The next one is Winger by Andrew Smith. This was also getting a lot of buzz like last year, I want to say, and no, very mediocre, very whiny, angsty, teenagey kind of book. There's something that happens with a gay character here that I just didn't like, how the gayness of the character, or the gender, the way that this was handled and portrayed. I thought it didn't make sense. It was kind of offensive in a way, not because it was stereotypical, because it was trying to be the opposite of the typical gay stereotype, but I just didn't like the way it was handled. If you've read it, you probably know what I mean. And last but not least for this section, I'm going to mention The Knife of Never Letting Go and the entire the Chaos Walking trilogy by Patrick Ness. Don't get me wrong, I love Patrick Ness, and I actually like this trilogy very much. I read it 2 years ago, or a year ago, and I really enjoyed it. This one was actually my favorite out of the trilogy. Nonetheless, I don't think it deserves as big a hype as it got in its moment on Booktube, but I still pretty much recommend it, so this is a good one. It just doesn't deserve that high a hype. Alright, next question is, which books are you currently planning on reading because they're so hyped on Booktube? And you should mention 5, but because I have no self-control whatsoever, I chose 10. And some of these are more hyped than the others. Some maybe are not as hyped, but they are becoming quite hyped recently, so I think that counts. The first one is one of such, and that is Arcadia by Ian Pearce. I am dying to read it. Like, I look at the cover and I know I should be reading it right now. It sounds like it's going to be my favorite book of the year. If you don't know what this book is about, go and find out, then come back. I also have 10th of December by George Saunders, a collection of short stories. I have How to Be Both by Ellie Smith. I have The Bone Clocks by David Mitchell. Fates and Furies by Lauren Groff. Until for the Time Being by Ruru Zeki. Kazuo Ishigaro's Never Let Me Go. Swamplandia by Karen Russell. This one is relatively new, but I've seen it on a couple of channels, so to me that counts as hyped. Just because I've seen it on YouTube, that means that it has some hype, at least relative hype. And I do think it's one of those books that, because it's kind of magical realism, very postmodern, it's going to become eventually very, very hyped. And it is the new and improved Romy Fudge by Julia Elliott. And lastly, The Vegetarian by Han Kang. Then the next question is, which books are very highly hyped on Booktube but you have no interest, no desire whatsoever in reading? And I have a bunch of these, particularly on the YA shelf. The Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas, never gonna read it. The Cassandra Clare novels, I actually own them and I'm looking at them right now on my bookshelf, but I know I'm never gonna read them, or it's just because I own them, I might read them in like 30 years, that's it. Another one is the Grisha trilogy by that person. What else? All those kind of the typical books that you see on the YA section that are like freshly out of the oven every week they come out. Just all those options, throw them in there. And then the last question for this video is, of course, the best one, and you know it was coming. It's which books you would wish could be more hyped. So these are the books that I think I've read that are fantastic, and they don't get all the attention that they really deserve. And I have 6 of this. The first one is Big Fish, a novel of mythic proportions by Daniel Wallace. I think this would be a hit on Booktube. It's very simple, it's very easy to read, it's super short, it's super fun, it's very beautiful. There's a movie out of this, there's a Broadway musical made out of this, and all those versions are beautiful, and the book is the original source material. I think it is a very, very beautiful, small, short novel, and people should be reading it, because it might not be the most important or smartest book in the world, but it's really, really nice, and it has a lot to offer. Then, There But For The by Alice Smith. I think this book could be really hyped. It's not that strange, it's just right there on the fine line, right on the point of being readable and being accessible enough, but still being incredibly different to anything you've ever read before. It's very original and very weird, but just so that you will still be able to enjoy it. Then a trilogy that I always mention in, I think, every video that I've made in my life is the Bartimaeus trilogy by Jonathan Stroud. I think this is the thing that Harry Potter lovers have been waiting for, and many of them haven't discovered yet, and I think if people gave themselves the opportunity, they would fall in love with this universe. Number 4 is Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. This is fairly popular, or at least it has been talked about more recently, but I think it should be even more popular than it is, because it has it all. It is creepy, it is fast-paced, it has the adventure, it has the sci-fi elements that are very popular and trendy right now, and most importantly, it has probably the best writing and the most beautiful writing I have ever seen on a sci-fi. Then The 13 Clocks by James Thurber, which I mentioned recently in one of my videos. This is fantastic. If you enjoy things like along the lines of Catherine M. Valenti, The Princess Bride, what else? Kind of very lyrical, sort of childish, but incredibly smart and beautiful and funny. You will love this. Love this. This is one of Neil Gaiman's favorite books, by the way. And lastly, I have Magic for Beginners by Kelly Link. Kelly Link is relatively popular, but I haven't seen this book talked about much on Booktube. It's my favorite book of 2016 so far. I think it is absolutely 100% fantastic, and there's Just so much greatness contained in these pages, you will not believe it. So there you go, guys. That was the hype book tag. I hope you enjoyed, and feel free to comment. I will see you later. Peace.